So you see what our young generation is dealing with, especially young girls.
Oh, yeah.
What is it that you want to pass down to this young generation of young girls and, based off the knowledge and the wisdom you've gained when it comes to relationship and love?
Mm. Is that they're enough. They are enough. I don't want them to reach 40 like myself and figure that out, that you're enough. I want them to know that from when they are 5, 6, 7, 8, that who you are and how you show up is you are enough.
Welcome, everyone, to the Simple Conversations podcast show. We are here in Atlanta having a great time. I got a couple of my friends around. We even have a dog in the audience today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm telling you, we're really expanding our fan base. This is awesome. But without further ado, I have a really special guest, someone who is very special to me. I'm so excited. Out of all my guests, this is the one I'm the most excited for. So here we go. I mean, she is the first African Canadian woman to create, write, and produce a primetime television show on a major Canadian network. Since then, she has written for the Oprah Winfrey Network, Lionsgate, Will Packer Media, Comedy Central, and CTV. She is also a four-time NAACP Theater Award winner for her stage play, The Kink in My Hair. Plus, she is a producer, professional speaker, lifestyle coach, as well as an author of her new books and stage play, Black Girl in Love with Herself, which is showing here in Atlanta this August 25th. And on top of that, she is a brand new mother. Wow. Everyone, welcome Trey Anthony to the show. Welcome, Trey.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Daniel. Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Yes, you know what? I actually have something embarrassing that I need to say. Please forgive
Oh,
me.
tell me.
Okay. So I only know two other women from Canada. And other than yourself, it's probably Deborah Cox. Oh, yeah. And Tamia. I know her too. But
Yeah,
you're like
there
the
you
only
go.
woman I
There you go.
personally know.
We're the best.
I
Once
love
you know a
Toronto.
Canadian.
You said what?
Yes. I said, once you know a Canadian, you know them all. It's very pretty small.
I tell you, yeah, I have a great time when I go to Canada. I've been there a few times. Toronto is my favorite city, but honestly, I'd really like to know what was it like being a young Canadian black girl in Toronto and growing up that way.
Well, I grew up, it's funny because I find a lot of times with Americans, when they hear my accent, there's a lot of assumption around just class differences, right? Like people usually feel like I must have grew up with a lot of money or I grew up middle class or something like that. And I grew up very working class in Toronto. I grew up in Toronto housing, which is considered the quote unquote projects of Canada. My mom was a single mom. And that's where I came from. It's very mixed in Canada. And that's one thing with Canada that you will find is that there's a big Caribbean population and people really hold on to their identity. There's a big Nigerian population, um, people from Ghana, people from Greece, Portugal. So one thing what I loved about growing up in Canada was just the cultural diversity, and everyone really held on to that identity of where their parents came from. So even if you were born in Canada, if you said, "Oh, where do you come from?" right? The first thing people would say, "Oh, is oh, I'm Jamaican," if their parents are Jamaican, right? Or they would say, "Oh, I'm from Guyana because my mother's from Guyana," even though they were born in Canada. So that was one of the things that I really loved and I missed a lot when I moved to the US was just that access to different cultures and growing up with different cultures around you. It wasn't so black and white. So that's what it was for me. Yeah.
So, did the culture really influence your art, or when did you start to gravitate towards that? Like, hey, I actually like writing. I like either poetry, or I'm influenced by these things within your culture. What is it that really? What? How did you gravitate towards that?
Really, what it was for me, I grew up, my mom had me as a young single mom, and my grandmother really stepped in as the parental figure. And my grandmother was Jamaican. And my grandmother was like one of those people you would have thought she never left Jamaica, right? Like you would have thought she never left, right? Like fresh off the boat for nearly 30 years of her life. That's how it felt like for me. And so culturally, I grew up in a very Jamaican household. And I noticed around me with a lot of my friends and family, especially in school, who were Jamaican as well, there was this thing that we had and these kind of inside jokes that we had. And just culturally, we just got each other. And we would be making fun of like our parents and being like the first generation Canadian or the first generation to go to higher education and all of those kind of things. And I would really have this thing about like imitating my grandmother and my aunties. And my grandmother used to really encourage that. And she would laugh a lot at me and be like, oh, do Auntie Zena when Auntie Zena was at Auntie Paulette's funeral and all of this kind of thing, right? And that's how I started, was just kind of telling jokes to my family, imitating my grandmother, my aunts, my West Indian aunties. And then people used to be like, "Oh my gosh, you're funny. You're really funny." And I started putting on these small little events um, at the local library. We used to charge $5 a pop. And it went like the first show we did, it was probably my grandmother and six of my aunts and cousins. And then it just started growing and growing. And then we got 20 people. Then when we got 20 people, I was feeling really good. Then it went to 50 people, then 100 people. And then eventually a producer from Second City came and was just like, what is this young girl doing attracting this younger audience? And they asked me to come and produce at, it was at that time a 75-seat theater, monthly showcases of this urban Caribbean comedy. And that's basically how I started. And then we went from doing 75-seat theaters to 300-seat theaters to 1,000-seat theaters in Canada. And that's basically how it all started. Yeah.
So, at a young age, did you feel comfortable with the limelight? Like, how was it performing in front of other people? And like, where did this confidence really come from? Were you validated more by the laughs, or just the way it made you feel, or was it just something inside you like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
I feel my grandmother vicariously lived through me. I believe my grandmother had a big influence on me, and she really was an artist that was never given the opportunity to really create her art or live in her art. So she had a big love for live theater. She loved music. She loved dance. And she really instilled that in me. But she also was a woman who was not only raising her six children herself, but she also had her grandchildren. And my grandmother worked for London Transportation, sweeping the trains at night. She had a grade 5 education. And so she didn't have the luxury of what I had to be able to nurture that gift and use that gift. And so she pushed me a lot, right? And one of the things that we used to do was like every Friday, there was this show on called Top of the Pops, which was kind of like this kind of countdown show of like what's the biggest music in Canada and England. And my grandmother would always go and buy a record of what the number one record was. And then she would tell me to memorize all the words and then write a song about it, right? Or write a play about it. And that's really how I started. And she just loved, her face would light up. And I started to really realize that I got validated from that. Like there was a level of validation from that, of how my family would be like, she's so funny and she can imitate things. And my grandmother would be like, oh, that girl, she can write anything you say, she can make it into a story. And so it was never frowned upon in my family around going into the arts. It was actually really encouraged, especially by my grandmother, because I think it was for her a dream so denied to herself that she wanted to kind of live through me. And so that's how it all started.
And I'm sure she is so proud of you right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, 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 very much so. Very, very, very much so. She passed away about 5 years ago, but I was so fortunate that she saw the height of my success, because even when I got the TV show in Canada. My grandmother was an extra on the set, and it was just the best time of her life. You would have thought that she was starring next to Sidney Poitier. She was just so happy just being on set and being in the background, and she just loved it. And so that was one of, I think, the best highlights of my life, was to see her witness me in that and to be a part of that.
Man, that is amazing. So it's good that your grandmother was such an influential figure in your life. But I haven't heard you mention your mother. What was your relationship with her growing up? And was she supportive of your gift?
My mother, I think, because my mother, also, my mom had me at 17, then she ended up having my brother 5 years after that, and then my sister. And so things were hard for my mother. I always say that my mother's biggest dream for all of her children was education. She saw it as a way out for us. And I think because she never got to complete high school, that was her thing. And so I remember when I told my mother I wanted to be an actor, I will never forget that she was like, the only acting you're going to be doing in my house is acting like a doctor or a lawyer. Right. So that was it. Right. My mother was, she just wasn't having it. But it, I was being encouraged secretly by my grandmother, and that seed had already been planted. And so I knew that's what I wanted to do from the get-go. But my mother was far from encouraging around it. But to her credit, I will say though, every single thing I did and every show I did, even before it became this big thing of like the kink in my hair and everything else, my mother would sit there in the front row and reluctantly be there, but also be the first one to stand up and clap, right? So it was very funny that, but I think she always thought that I was going to do something else with my life. I even talk about it in Black Girl in Love with Herself, where she says, I don't understand, like how people pay you to prance around on stage. Like she says, she's always just like, I don't get it. I don't understand it, but this is what she does. Right. So, but now she's very, very, very proud of me. But, my sister, my younger sister, has a PhD and is a doctor and is in cancer research. And so that's my mother's golden child.
Yeah.
So that is my mother's golden child. So I think, thank God, her dream was fulfilled through my sister, who got her higher education. And my mother could say, I have a daughter who is the doctor, right? So there's that. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And, it's very interesting when it comes to, not only black parents, but parents from even different cultures and different backgrounds, and how important it is to come from a family where you have purpose. Like, you're not just going to be born, like you're going to be born and you're going to do something. You either have to be, like you said, a doctor, a lawyer, or a scientist, or something of that nature, to where you make a great living, but also contributing to society in a different way. Because even for myself personally, I played basketball. That was really my thing. But, my parents were very tough with education. And they said, if I don't take care of my studies, they're going to take this away from me. But also finding support in that. But, it's a lot different with the art, because, art is more subjective, in that sense. But I just think it's so unique about you, how you're always been able to, just have attention and people be drawn to you, and also be able to have, people not only be drawn, but have an impact, and they feel your words and it sticks with them. And that's just amazing to witness. But, going back to your mom, you said your mom was one of your biggest fans. You also wrote a book called How Black Mothers Say I Love You. And did you have a show as well, if I'm correct?
Yes. So it was a play. And then recently the TV rights got bought, and also the film rights got bought. And so we're now shopping the TV pilot for it. And that was based on the life of my mother and grandmother. I start the play with the statement that says, I come from women who leave their children behind. And so it's about the immigration and migration experience of a lot of Caribbean women who came over from Jamaica and the West Indies to England. Some went to England, some went to Canada, and some went to America. My grandmother was one of them who came over on the boat. When they literally say it was a boat, it was a boat. And she came under, it was called the domestic scheme for women. And my grandmother came over and she left her 4 children behind in Jamaica, and she was separated from them for over 6 years before she was able to send for them. And one of the things that was really important for me was that there was over 23, I think it was 23,000 women who came over under the domestic scheme. And nobody ever talked about the history of these Black women who came. Like my grandmother talked about coming to England. And when she came, there were signs on the doors that said no dogs, no cats, and no Blacks, and how they were treated. And nobody ever talked about what that emotional separation did to these women and children. And I always say that I feel my family, especially my mother and my grandmother, myself, we suffered the emotional consequences of migration because my grandmother and my mother were never able to bond sufficiently again after that. And then my mother repeated the cycle when she went to Canada. She went and left me with my grandmother in England for 4 years. And so I was separated from my mother. And again, I feel that separation. And, I talk about it in the book, also Black Girl in Love with Herself. I say, we are a family of women who we can laugh, we can joke, we could do all of those things, but we can't talk about feelings. I can't talk about what it was like as an 8-year-old to be separated from my mother until I was 12 years old, and then not be able to physically receive touch from her anymore. Right. And there's this distance and there's this kind of barrier that we have never been able to overcome as a family. And so when my grandmother was dying with terminal cancer, I was reading this book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And I took my iPhone, right? I didn't have a fancy setup like you at all. I just had my little iPhone, right? And I went to record my grandmother because I really wanted to capture her. And I said to my grandmother, what is the one thing that you regret that if you could do over in your life? And I thought she would say, I wish I traveled or I wish I went to school. And she said, the one thing I would do, she goes, I would never leave my children. And she said, because especially your mother, she never forgave me for that. And I was just shocked. And I remember telling my mother it, and my mother didn't believe me. And I was so glad that I captured that to show her. And when I showed her, my mother just started crying because she said for years she carried around this thing of her mother didn't want her. And that's when I started interviewing a lot of women who had done the same thing, who came over on the boat to either Canada and America. And all of them had that same level of regret and saying that they've never recovered from that. And so that is why I just really felt it important to give voice to those women who basically carried the menial work of Canada, England, and America literally on their backs. And nobody talks about that history. And so for me, I felt very much purpose-driven to not only tell that story for my grandmother, but to tell it for all of the thousands of Caribbean women who came over and they're not in the history books around what happened to them.
Man, you're about to make me cry right now. Golly, this is really heavy. But I mean, that is one thing we don't really know about even here in America, right? I mean, we have our Black history in America, but we don't really know our Black history in Canada or Black history in Mexico or Black history anywhere outside of the world. We're everywhere and we have stories to tell. Do you feel like Black history in Canada has been highlighted, or were there any other inspirations that you look to? Anybody, from Canada that you admired as well? Or were there any kind of stories that really kind of drove you, and then now going through your own situation, how it affected you? Does it all tie in together?
Yeah, for me, there was this woman who was a Jamaican woman called Miss Lou, who was a big storyteller, very big poet, Jamaican poet, and she spoke in patois, and that was frowned upon for many years. And she was one of those women who took up a lot of space and who was very proud of her Jamaican culture and speaking patois, which was viewed as less educated. And she was a big influencer on my life, a big influence. Because I remember my grandmother always used to be like, "Oh, you're going to be the next Miss Lou," right? And so she was someone. And then I remember reading, I think it was in high school, The Third Life of Grange Copeland, by Alice Walker. And that really made me think that I wanted to be a writer. And then James Baldwin Giovanni Room also was a big influence on me as a writer as well. So there was just so many Black authors and writers that really just made me go, yeah, this is possible for me. And I knew that I wanted to talk about generational trauma and generations of women. And I knew that was really important for me to talk about what we pass down, good and bad, as tradition, right? And how we don't heal trauma a lot of the times. And a lot of times we don't have the luxury to heal trauma because we are so much in survival mode as Black people, right? And so that was really important for me to examine in all of the work that I do.
Side note, I was actually having a conversation about this with one of my friends, and we were discussing that trauma is passed down in our DNA.
Oh,
Do you
of
believe
course.
that?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I talk about it in Black Girl in Love with Herself. I talk about where there was the book starts in the moment in my life where my 5-year relationship abruptly blew up in my face. I had a 2-week-old brand new baby. We were about to go into a pandemic. I suddenly found myself homeless with nowhere to go. And my mother and my sister drove down from Florida to Atlanta to basically come and pack up my shit with me and bring me back to their house, their cocoon. And there was one moment in the bathroom, I was with my mother and I was just devastated. And I knew she didn't want me to cry. And I just knew this. And I remember, like, I just started to just above a whisper. And I said, "Mom, I don't think I'm going to make this. I don't think I can handle this." And she looked everywhere but into my eyes. And she said, "You cannot let this break you. Remember whose daughter you are. Your grandmother had it way worse. I had it way worse. And we still survived." And it was in that moment I said, "But I don't want to survive though. I actually want to thrive. I want to be able to sit with this and work this out and feel the pain. I don't want to pretend that it's not happening to me." And I realized in that moment, I said in the book, my mom could be the person who gives me the pep talk to keep going and get up, but she can't be my safe space because my mother does not believe that Black women can be vulnerable or that we could be fragile. And she didn't know what to do with that with me. And I feel that's where the trauma gets passed down because we're not allowed to talk about emotions. We're not allowed to sit with pain. What we are told is you get back up and you get back up and you keep getting back up and you don't have any time or luxury to process what has happened to you. Right. And so for me, I was like, this ends here with me. And I think, especially because I had a child, I was just like, I don't want to raise my child like that. I don't want my child to say my mother survived the worst, right? I don't want him to say that and wear that as a badge of honor. I want him to say my mother was healthy, my mother thrived, my mother loved me and was able to give and receive love. She was gentle with me, she was tender with me, she was tender with herself. I don't want him to wear my pain as a badge of honor. And that is where I feel as Black people, we have made this commitment to ourselves that that's what we do. And I'm saying now, and that's why I wrote the book, of like, there's a new way of doing things, guys. And this isn't something to be proud of anymore. We don't have to be in survival mode anymore, but yet we act like it at all times.
Now you've already had sold out arenas. You've already been showcasing your art. You've been doing your thing. We know that this is what you're passionate about and this is your career path. At what point did you decide to just go all in on this and this is what I'm going to do for my life? This is my purpose.
Um, I think for me, I've always been a person who always just believes that, at the risk of sounding woohoo, right? I always been a big believer in you can't control what is your destiny and what God has put for you to be on your path of a purpose-driven life. And so for me, it's never been about the Hollywood dream. It's never been about, oh, I got to be rich and famous. It's always been about doing work that I love and doing work that I feel makes a difference and about giving voice to the voiceless. So for me, it's never been about going all in. It's always been about just getting really still and saying to God, okay, like, what do you need me to do? Where do you want me to go? What is this going to look like? Because if there's anything that I've learned, Daniel, in my life, is that you can make the best plans, right? The best plans and think you've got it covered. And someone is going to throw you a curveball. The universe is going to say, oh, that isn't how it's going to go. And so if there's one thing that I've learned to do is just trust that I'm on the right path and that if a curveball does come, it's to really save me, even though sometimes it feels like it's to destroy me. And just to know that if you function from a place of walking in your purpose, being led by spirit, and a place of integrity of treating people the way you want to be treated, the world will unfold for you in the way that it needs to. And that's just how I believe. And that's what I believe. Like, and I think too, because I've come from a place where there wasn't enough, that there was a lot of lack, and I still was able to do my art. Then I came from a place where there was an abundance of things, and then I lost it. Right. So I'm always functioning from that place of this is where I'm at now. And whatever resources I need to do or achieve or obtain to do my art, it will come. And whoever needs to be in the audience, be it 2 people, be it 5 people, be it 5,000, it will still have the same effect that it needs to have. And as you just said, like, even every single podcast I do, I never look at it like, oh, this is like my 50th podcast that I've done this month. So therefore I shouldn't give it my best. Right. I just always believe that you don't know who's going to be listening that day, who needs exactly what you're saying to inspire them or to get them out of that dark place. And so you always just show up your best and you show up with a level of grace and you show up with a level of intention and just knowing that you're walking and doing the work that you need to do. And that's just where I function from.
Man, and you're already an inspiration to me because I think you're dope as fuck anyway. So I love it. I love being around your presence and I love seeing the way you move and even being at your shows in the past. Like, I just love the opportunities you are creating, not only for Black people and other individuals to work with you, but also just blessing the audience. Wherever you go, there's always someone that's walking away feeling better than they did before based off the words and the story that you're sharing and being that vulnerable. So it's awesome. But let's get to a point where you actually did have it. Like, what was that like, just dealing with all the fame, the attention, and then you got your family and you're on this show. And then also, I mean, for the first time, being the first African Canadian woman to get her show greenlit on the air, and what came with all of that?
I talk about it in the book as well, in Black Girl in Love with Herself, where I talk about the various microaggressions, and I say micro, but they were really macroaggressions that comes with being a Black woman, at quote unquote at the top of her game, and especially working in an industry where the people in charge of your life and destiny are white people who don't understand your culture. I talk about an incident where we had a white showrunner who was running our show, and we were two young Black women in our 20s who were given the opportunity. And anytime we remotely disagreed with her, she would burst into tears. We would get dragged into the network office and be told we were intimidating, we were aggressive, and it's nothing that, funny enough, doing this tour, every time I read that passage, I hear every Black woman in the audience goes, mm-hmm. And then I say this, I go, and we were called, and I don't even finish the sentence, and they will yell, intimidating, aggressive, right? Because we all know what it feels like, right? We know what it is. We
Yeah.
know how we have to talk in a soft soprano at all times in the workforce, right? So it's funny when people say, oh, you were so blessed to have your own TV show and do all of those things. And I will never, ever say that I wasn't blessed, but I will also say it was the place in my career where I felt the least powerful, right? I just felt powerless. I felt so sad, so just like it didn't matter who we were, or we could have been any Black person. They just didn't care. And the stories were told the way that they, as the network, wanted to tell them. And so I always say, I'm glad to have the opportunity of the kink. I know if I didn't have the opportunity of the kink, I probably wouldn't have been able to buy my first home. I know that I wouldn't be able to have the success that I now have as well, to have access to writing a book and to sell out theaters and all of those things. But it came at a severe cost to my soul.
Yeah, and I could understand that. I mean, especially being the first one. Do you feel like
Yeah.
that's just the cross to bear? And like, there's a lot of people that have been the first in a lot of areas because, our voice wasn't heard in those areas. So now you're in the room. You're here with these people and now you're hearing all the things they're talking about. I mean, that had to be very tough to deal with.
Yeah. And it was extremely hard. And I think what people forget too, we were 20 something year olds, right? I came from Rexdale, which was, I said like the quote unquote projects. I was making more money in 1 week that I knew my grandmother probably never made in her lifetime. So I was very aware of what this financially meant to my family and to me. And so I came into there being just very scared that everything was going to be taken away from me. And not only would it affect me, it would affect the camera crew, who some of them were like the first time they were able to work on an all Black show as Black cameramen. They were feeding their families. And so there was a lot of pressure placed on us that we wanted to tell an authentic story. But then we knew every time we tried to fight to tell authentic stories, we were shut down and we were called intimidated. And then we had, the threat of losing our show placed on us. And then when we told the stories, then the audience would be like, that isn't what the kink was like. And that doesn't sound authentic. So it was just, you just couldn't please everybody. And so it was really, I wrote about it in the book. There was one time where I was in the studio and I don't even think I was 30 at that point in time. And I had this gripping pain in my chest. And I ended up having a mild heart attack. And I know it was because I went to the hospital, got strapped up and everything. And the doctor was like, you are having a heart attack. And I know it was because of what was happening or not happening on that set of that TV show and all of the stress that was being placed on me. And so, yeah, there's, I think sometimes and I think that was the first time in my life where I really thought about where be careful what you pray for, because if you get it, it might not be what you want.
Yeah, that is wild. An immense amount of pressure and stress. Did you feel like you had any mentors? Was there anyone before you could look at? Has there ever been any other Black
Oh,
people in your
yeah.
position that you're just like, oh, I need your help, and were they there for you?
Definitely. For me, everybody knows my obsession with Oprah Winfrey, that, I love Oprah. She was definitely a big source of inspiration for me growing up. Whoopi Goldberg was a big inspiration because she was a dark-skinned Black woman, and I had never seen someone who looked like me, looked like her on TV, and I was like, wow, they're doing it. So they were big inspirations to me. There was also another woman, Karen King, who was the production executive at Global Television, where the show was on. And she was one of the first Black executives in a position of power. And I remember like she would just kind of take us aside and sometimes whisper in our ear, just of like little prep talks of like how to conduct ourselves as young Black women, what to say, what battles to fight, and things like that. And so there were definitely mentors and people who I looked at and viewed at. But at that time, there wasn't a Shonda Rhimes, there wasn't an Issa Rae. I didn't have those people or access to that, or even the level of, I would say, tenacity that I saw that they were able to have in power. But we didn't have that. And Canada was very, very behind. I just read an article 2 days ago where they were talking about the kink in my hair. There hasn't been another Black sitcom on Canadian TV since the kink in my hair in over 15 years. So just think about that.
Wow.
That's how behind we are as a country around seeing Black people on TV. So since the kink, we have not had another Black sitcom on TV. That's unheard of in the US.
Other than hockey, what are people watching in Canada? Like, what is it that people are really drawn to? Is it just Schitt's Creek and a whole bunch of shows like that? What is it that,
because we don't have the infrastructure and we don't have the power. And only until recently now, people are starting to actually really question that and go, it's not good enough. And now too, because the mainstream channels are seeing they're losing their audience to the streamers, they're starting now to have the quote unquote talk around diversity. And now Black is in, and South Asian people are in, and Asian people are in. But we are very far behind in that conversation around people of color on TV in Canada, right? So when we see the abundance of riches that you guys have, like, Blackish, Insecure, Atlanta, even like several urban radio stations, we're not there. We are not there. And so we walk through the world in a whole different way than I think Black Americans do in the entertainment industry. Canada doesn't have that.
you would say the same even in the music side, as big as Drake and all these other,
It's Drake,
okay,
right?
that's it, yeah.
And that's it. And that's why we lose our bests. And they talk about that, right? Of the talent drain in Canada, because there's so many talented people who end up leaving. And that was one of the reasons why I left, go to the US and start writing for Will Packer and the OWN network, because after my show was done, there was nothing else left for me to do. People were like, well, we gave you a TV show. What now? Like, what more do you want? Right. And I was still kind of like, I'm still young. I still have ideas, but that was it.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next question as far as transitioning from Canada to America, and like adjusting to the American culture, American comedy, American, drama. And it's, humor in America is much different than Canada. How is that adjusting? And then now you're getting into the writers' rooms now, and you're seeing all these different kind of personalities, and then also you trying to fit in being Canadian. Like, how was it now being in a room full of other Black writers?
There was definitely a learning curve, but I think one of the beauties of not having Black Canadian TV is that we were inundated by Black American TV, right? So we knew the shows you were watching. We also had, we had the Cosby Show, we had A Different World, we had, Different Strokes, we had all of. So I grew up, I knew what American comedy was because I watched it as a Black Canadian. So I knew how to write it and what it sounded like and what it felt like. But then there were obviously some things just culturally that I had to relearn. Or sometimes I would say something and people were like, oh, no, that ain't gonna work here, And so for me, even leaving Canada and starting all over again, that was a chance that I decided to take of, I think you were at one of the first shows that I did in Atlanta, where I did it, I think in like 120 seat theater. And my mother was like, you come all the way to the US to do 120 seats, right? And she was like, what's wrong with you? You're doing 1,000 seat theaters in Canada. And now you come to do. And so it was that level of being humble and humility. But it was time for me to leave. I knew in my soul it was time for me to reinvent myself and go and leave and start again. And I think you should never be scared of change. And so I learned a lot in those writing rooms, but I also think they learned a lot from me because I just had a different way of seeing the world because my experience was different than Black Americans.
True. That is true. And were there any shows that you really enjoyed writing for that you really liked? What was at the top of your list?
I would say there are shows that I wish I could write for.
Oh, of course. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Like This Is Us and Insecure, I really love. Queen Sugar, I really love. Those are the kind of shows that I would love to do, right? So that's where I feel. And then, of course, I'm now shopping How Black Mothers Say I Love You. I also have another TV show in development called Black Male Baby. And I also have the TV rights for Black Girl in Love just got bought as well. So I'm hoping those will get on a US network, and we're trying to, package them with a US network on board. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. I'm always excited for you. I love seeing you win. It makes me very happy.
Thank you so much.
Trey, what I've always admired about you is that you've always been open, honest, and vulnerable about your relationships. How do you handle being in love while trying to maintain your career and your fame, really? What pressures come with that?
Oh my gosh. It's funny. People have been calling me since the book, a relationship expert, a love expert. And I'm like, please don't put that kind of pressure on me because I'm just trying to figure it out as I go along. Right. You know, I will say I love. And I know I'm a person who, no matter how many times I've failed at it, and I think this is where I get the resilience from my mother and grandmother, I'm still a believer that, my person's out there. There's someone who is waiting on me who's gonna be like, I've been waiting for you, girl, and it's going to fall into place. But to date someone like me is very hard. And I know that.
And before you go into that, what is your sign? How about that?
I'm Aquarius.
Aquarius? Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah. Well, what does that mean, Danny?
I mean, it can mean a lot of things. We actually have an Aquarius in the studio right now. So
Oh, what are you?
I am a Pisces.
Oh, I love Pisces.
My birthday is February 28th, and I think yours is on the 18th, right?
18th.
Mine is February 18th. Yep.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right.
Wow. Look at that. I mean, we're just vibing. We're chilling. This is a great conversation. That's awesome. So I see. But going back to relationships and just managing your career as well as, finding love and still believing in it.
I believe in it. And I do. I think it's definitely have been much more challenging now dating as a solo parent, right? Because it's very hard for someone, even though they know you have a child, for someone to hear you say, my child is going to be my first priority. It really is challenging, even though they hear it and know it. But to actually be in effect is a whole different thing for them, So I have found that very challenging. And also, too, to be really quite frank, by the time, I'm touring the book right now, I'm writing a couple of TV shows. My son is in school, then he comes home at 6. I make dinner, I put him in the bath, I get him ready for bed. He's in bed by 8:39, and I'm done, right? And I keep thinking to myself, I don't know where I would find the emotional energy to call somebody and be like, hey, how's your day? Right? Because I'm tired. I am just tired. And so I've tried it and I always fail. Like I failed since I've had my son. I've dated maybe about 2 people so far. And it always comes down to, they always like, I don't think you have time in your life for me. I don't feel like a priority. And I understand you have a child, but then there's your work and then there's all of the other stuff you do. And so I'm trying to figure it out and I haven't gotten the formula yet.
But why is
And
work such a priority?
Because I don't see it as work. And I think that's where the challenge comes in. I think if I had a regular 9 to 5 where I'm like, okay, Monday to Friday, I work 9 to 5, then I come home and I'm done. And then I got my weekends to myself. But I'm the type of person who it's not unusual for me to go to bed at 10 and then all of a sudden I have a dream and I'm getting up and I'm like, oh my God, I got to write this down. Oh my God, this would be so good. Or I'm sending, a text to my assistant at 12 o'clock in the morning, at 1 o'clock in the morning, going, hey, remind me of this. Or I'm running into my office and typing down something that I feel was just inspired by God for me to write down, and then it's not unusual for me if I have a script to write to be locked up in my room and just writing away, missing dinner, missing every single thing, and not even remembering sometimes to even breathe because I'm so caught up in my work. I love my work. I love what I do. And so I don't see it as work. And so, and I know this probably will not increase my chances of dating, but I will say this until I find someone who I love as much as I love my work.
Man, shout out to work. I tell you, you Aquariuses are overachievers. You guys love your jobs. I tell you, I know.
I do. I love my work and I'm not going to lie. And I can't lie about it. I love what I do. And so I'm a very challenging person to date. And I think people love the idea of me. Like when people meet me, they're like, oh my God, she's so cool. And oh, she does all these shows and they come out and see it and they get caught up in that world. But the reality of what it takes to put on the show and the level of commitment and energy, they're not prepared for. They like coming opening night and they love doing the red carpets and they like jumping in the limo and they like seeing the crowd and they like being Trey Anthony's partner. But the level of commitment to do all of that before opening night, nobody's prepared for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very tough to deal with, because unless they're able to understand your world and know what you're going through and also have a passion for that, it would be kind of tough to
exactly.
find a way to really mesh with
Yeah.
somebody. Does your art imitate your life?
Oh my
When you're
God.
dealing
Everything.
with love,
Everything.
when you're dealing with heartbreak, are you pulling from the stories and the situations that you've been through?
Oh,
And
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. There's, of course, some fiction weaved in, but mostly all of my work has come from like the kink in my hair was set in a hairdressing salon. I grew up in a hairdressing salon, right? My aunt was a hairdresser. So some of the monologues that dealt with colorism in the Black community were direct quotes that I heard in my family, being the darkest one in my family. There was a monologue about a young girl coming out to her family as queer. That was a conversation that I had with my own family. Black Girl in Love with Herself talks about my own. I think that's the most, not the most, yet definitely my whole life. It's like a memoir in that book, and it's the truth. And I wrote that book when my partner and I broke up and how devastated I was. And me just looking I remember I start the book in that moment where I'm on the bathroom floor and I'm crying and I'm saying, God, I don't want to live like this. But I know I can't continue the way I am. And thinking to myself, how did I get here? And so, what I really found in that book was writing that book was that question of how did I get here was because I poured into someone so much that I forgot about pouring into myself, right? And at that time, when I met my partner at that time, I was just so enamored by her. Like I was just like, oh my God, that this was the first time in my life that I felt, oh, I had met someone who I could fully give to. And I gave at the expense of my own self. And in the book, there's a part where I say, you have to make people catch you loving yourself. And I had forgotten that. Like I showed up in that relationship very broken, very much still not healed because I was in survival mode, going back to what we talked about all my life. I had been raised by women who were in survival, so I was in survival. So I hadn't healed any of my inner traumas, childhood traumas. And so I showed up saying to, please love me, love me, love me, love me. And so when she walked out of my life, I was like, oh, okay. Now that must then mean I'm unlovable because there's no one here to love me. And I had to do that inner work and look deep within myself to say, hey, you can be that person who loves you in that way. And I think for a lot of women, we forget that we're so busy pouring into partners, husbands, children, our jobs, right? That that's what gives us meaning and that becomes our whole identity. And when those things are taken away from us for whatever reason, we don't know what to do with ourselves. And that was the most lost I've ever felt in my entire life. But I recognized I had given away the job of loving me to someone else. And I had to get that back and I look back at my life and I can't believe that was 5 years of my life where I had no clue of who I was because I didn't know where I started and where she began. And so when they even walked out and said, oh, I actually don't want to do this anymore, I was kind of like, what? So where do I go with my life? What do I do now? And I realized the biggest lesson, and I share it in the book, and so many women have written to me and said that, is that you cannot give up that responsibility to anyone, right? Of loving you if you can't love yourself properly. And so for me, I think going back to the question too about dating, right now I'm so in love with myself and I'm so good about being by myself that it would have to take a really damn good person to walk into my life to be for me to go, yeah, okay. Yeah, I can match that energy because this energy is up here now. Whereas before I had such a low vibration, right? Low vibration that anybody could come in and say, hey girl, I'll be like, hey. And now I'm kind of like, good. Over here, I'm real good. Real good. So you better be coming to add, right? Not trying to fix me in any kind of way or take away from me. You are adding to the joy and fulfillment in my life. And that's where I'm at right now.
So going back to going through that transition of, all right, I'm at this low point. Anyone is welcome in now. Now our standards have changed. What was it like when Trey was in love? How does Trey love somebody?
It's funny, Daniel, even though I say I love my job and but a friend of mine, we were just driving in the car this evening and she said, anyone who finds you, they're going to be lucky because you love, like you really love with all your heart. And even in the book, there was a part where my mom said to me, you know what your problem is? You give too much and never love nobody more than they love you. And that's the advice, right? And I was like, I don't want to be that person of being like, oh, I'm gonna fool you and make you think that I'm not loving you and you're not loving me and we're gonna figure this out. I want to show up and love somebody, and I do love someone like that. But I think now what I've recognized, which I didn't recognize 5 years ago, is that it needs to be reciprocated, and it needs to be reciprocated in a healthy way. And also, too, there were a lot of red flags that I saw that I chose to ignore because I was in love with the idea of us versus who that person really was. And so I went into it knowing a lot of things, going, oh, I think I could change that. I can fix that. Oh, that's not that bad. That's not really a red flag. Maybe a little burgundy, but not quite red. Right. And now I'm like, what you see is what you get. Pretty much whoever you see is what you get. You cannot go into something trying to change someone. And so I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned in this love journey. You can love someone, but you also, that doesn't mean you loving someone means that you stop loving yourself. And also knowing that you are worthy of kindness. You are worthy of tenderness. You are worthy of someone listening to you. You are worthy of a level of emotional intelligence back. And I think that is why it's funny, my son, before he goes to bed, I rub lavender here on his temples. And then I also rub his feet with lavender, right? And my mother always goes, "Oh, you're just spoiling him. Why does he have to do all that?" And I said, "Because I want him to grow up knowing he should expect tenderness in his life." That's something I didn't expect from people because I grew up with someone who, and my mother did her best, but there was not tenderness. So if I did not grow up in a household where tenderness was the main focus, why would I then look for tenderness from someone else? So the roughness felt, I recognized this, I knew this, right? And so when somebody was, picking at me or being rough or not being tender and not guarding my emotions, this felt very much like something that I knew. And now I'm like, no, this actually is not. That is trauma. And I want to now be with somebody who's able to hold me in tenderness because that's how I'm holding myself now. That's how I hold my child. And so if you are not expecting tenderness from me, you can't give it back to yourself and vice versa. Right. And so that's my main priority now. Before I used to have this list of, oh, they have to make 100,000 a year. Oh, they have to dress really nice. Oh, they have to have a good car. And women, we have the list. All of us have the list, straight, gay, whatever. Right. We all have a damn list of what that person's supposed to be. Now, my biggest thing is, are they healed? Are they doing their work? Are they tender with themselves and are they tender with others? Do they walk with a level of integrity? Are they about creating home with me? Are they able to forgive me when I'm flawed? Those are the kind of things I'm looking for now. And that's where the growth has come in for me. Before it was very much what we could look like and what I could post on Instagram, right? The image. And now I'm like, there's got to be something much more sustainable for me.
So you see what our young generation is dealing with, especially young girls.
Oh, yeah.
What is it that you want to pass down to this young generation of young girls and, based off the knowledge and the wisdom you've gained when it comes to relationship and love?
Is that they're enough. They are enough. I don't want them to reach 40 like myself and figure that out, that you're enough. I want them to know that from when they are 5, 6, 7, 8, that who you are and how you show up is you are enough. And that you're worthy of someone to love you. You are worthy of giving yourself love. You're worthy for asking for more. And that's okay. You don't have to shrink. Right. And I feel that is something that I think this comparison game, I thank God that I didn't grow up in the world of Facebook and Instagram in my teens, right? Because I don't know where I would be right now. The pressure in itself, I even find even with myself, anytime I'm starting to feel a lot of anxiety or anxious or I'm getting hard on myself, I know it's always the times when I've spent way too much time on social media because you do that comparison game. Right? And you start going, oh my God, look how skinny she is. Oh my God. Oh, she went to the gym 5 times this week. Oh, and I didn't even go once. Oh my gosh, look at her and her husband. Look how happy they look. Oh my God, look at her perfect kids. Look at them. Oh my gosh, look at her. She could just got that film deal. Right. And you do that whole comparison. And now I'm just like, mm-mm. I'm very intentional now about my social media. I go on at a certain time. And if I find myself scrolling too much, I can feel the anxiety starting in me. And so I'm like, I'm not doing that. And I totally unfollow people who make me feel shitty about my life. Right? I totally unfollow them.
Yeah, fuck them. And screw social media. Death to social media. No, I'm just playing. I'm
Right?
just playing.
It's true. It is true because never, what you imagine. I remember even when my partner and I broke up and people were like, oh my God, but you guys seem so perfect. And you were couple goals and you were this. And I was like, I even believed the hype. I believed it. And yet behind closed doors, we weren't. right? But I would look on social media and go, oh my God, look how cute we look. And oh my gosh, our picture just got 500 likes, right? And instead of going, wait a minute, do I like this person though that I'm living with?
Yeah. Yeah, that's real. That's real.
And I think some of us need to ask that question. You could get 500 likes, but do you like yourself? Do you like that person who's sleeping next to you in bed? But you could be posting away your whole entire life and you believe the fantasy. And I know I've done it myself. I believe the fantasy. So,
But what about when people are sliding in your DMs and giving you all this kind of attention? Like, what's up?
hey, what's up? Hey, man, listen, I'm single, Daniel, man. Hey, and you know me, I'm an equal opportunist.
Oh, yeah. All right. I dig it. I dig it. Yes, absolutely.
So I don't mind slide in.
Trey, I know you're in Tampa, Florida right now, but you are actually making your way to Atlanta this week. Can you please enlighten me and let me know what's going on with you?
Yes, I will be doing the show Black Girl in Love with Herself. And funny enough, Black Girl in Love with Herself is based on my book, the self-help book. And when I was thinking about touring the book, I was just like, I don't want to do like a regular book tour, like me reading from the book, boring. I was just like, I don't want to do that. And then I also knew that I felt really inspired by self-help and by talking and about my journey around healing. But I also know that I love comedy. My background's comedy and stand-up, and I love theater. And I was actually working with a business coach, and I was saying to her, I said, I just don't know what to do because I feel like I've been called to do this work around self-help and with my book, but I also love comedy and I love doing my theater. And I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she said, then why can't you do it all in one show? And I was like, what do you mean? It's just like, just bring the book alive in the way that you do it. And so that is what Black Girl in Love with Herself, the touring show, is. It's comedy, it's theater, it's self-help. There's me interacting with the audience, call and response. There are like sketches, there is drama, there is candid self-talk, all of that kind of stuff. And women have actually been like crying in the front row while laughing in the front row. And every single city we've done has sold out so far. People keep saying it's one of the best shows ever. People are saying it's a show that is changing lives. And I just truly feel it's one of my best works ever because I think it's the most authentic and realist that I've ever been. And I'm able to bring women on that journey of what it has been for me in the last 3 years of going from thinking that I found the love of my life to being crumpled on the bathroom floor, to being homeless with a 2-week-old baby, to finally finding my voice and saying, oh, here I am. I got back up, but not only did I get back up, I got back up healed. And that is a big difference because a lot of us get back up, but we don't get back up healed.
So, what was the process like of being able to find a venue, produce the show, put it all together? Now you're getting to the moment where you're stepping on the stage and you're looking in front of all these thousands of people. And now you're telling your story and the things that you've been through. What is going through your mind during that time or at that point?
For me, it is, it's funny, backstage, before we go on stage, the 3 actors who are in the show with me, we do this thing and we say, it's this mantra, and it says, talk to them, listen to them, heal them. And that's what I believe this work is for. I get excited. I get this feeling as if I'm walking in my purpose and God is speaking through me. And I believe that one of my biggest purpose is to be intentional about creating safe spaces for Black women to heal, to laugh, to talk, to re-examine ourselves, to kind of say, hey, maybe we should be doing this a bit differently. In this, I talk about my own journey around mental health and the mental health in my family. I talk about love. I talk about, my issues that I have with my body. I talk around like acceptance. I talk about giving too much, not giving enough at some point, and it's the most vulnerable I've ever been. But I recognize in that vulnerability, that's where people find themselves. Because if I'm able to be that vulnerable, they are then able to have conversations not only with themselves, but with each other, with other women in their lives, with their husbands, with their partners, with whomever. Because a lot of times, what I get back, the feedback I get from women is they go, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only one." Or I didn't realize you were going through this while I was going through this. So for me, it's about the taking off the mask and taking off the curated version of what you see of my life on the Facebook and Instagram and going, this is the real deal. This is how I feel. And my biggest thing has been around talking about mental health and my journey with mental health and dealing with functional depression. And so many women going to me, "Oh my God, how do you do it? I never would thought that you struggle with depression. You always seem so happy. You always have this and that." And it's like all of those things. And so many of us are suffering in silence. So for me, it's around really giving voice to that and removing that stigma in our community, and also saying to women to find and seek therapy. And you could also be religious and go and talk to your pastor, but also go see a damn therapist, right? Go see a damn therapist. And men too, right? I've had some of the most honest conversations I've had with my brother and his friends around Black men and their mental health. That's something that we just don't talk about. And if you think about it, we've gone through a friggin' pandemic, guys. This isn't the real, like the old stuff. This is real things of trauma. And yet we, again, as Black people, go into the survival mode instead of going, I don't know if you're okay. I really don't think you're that okay. And I can't tell you how many people I know whose relationships didn't survive the pandemic, right? And yet they're dealing with being in the pandemic. They're dealing with job loss. They're dealing with financial insecurity. They're dealing with love loss. And yet they're just getting up every day and acting like everything's cool. I don't think so. Right. So for me, that's what this show is about, is really giving us a chance to have these conversations, but also have it and also laugh at sometimes how absurd we are as Black people in our survival. Right.
Yes, that is true because you were right. I mean, the pandemic did break up a lot of families. It did break up a lot of relationships, especially in the Black community too. So, personally, how did you deal with the pandemic? And then also, why do you decide to keep going? Why do you want to keep showcasing your art, putting it out there? And like, why do you want to continue to help Black girls or Black women in general?
Yeah. How I dealt with the pandemic was one day at a time. Um, it was one of the worst times to have a brand new baby, right? Just to think about that. Like the first few months of my life with my son, I had nobody around, right? Because everybody was scared. Everybody thought, you could die just by showing up at someone's house. So it was a lot of loneliness. But in that, it also gave me a chance to really slow down and really enjoy motherhood and bond with him, because it was just the two of us at all times, and be intentional about really looking at my life. And I wrote the book during the pandemic. I don't think I would have been able to have the luxury of having a whole year to get up every single day from 9 to 5 and write with a baby strapped to me, right? Because there was nowhere else for me to go. So this writing really saved my life, right? And for me, why I continue to do the work that I do, it's the full circle moment again of, it's not about me. It has never been about me. It's always been about what I feel I've been put on this earth to do. And one of my biggest things when I was writing Black Girl in Love with Herself, I said there was a moment when it was one of my darkest hours. And I heard this very clear voice that said to me, your mess is going to be your message, and you need to share it with others so they too can heal. but I wouldn't have broken you this down if I wasn't prepared to lift you up, because you're going to lift others up in their brokenness. Because there was a time where, I'm being really honest, Daniel, like I was just like, I'm not going to make it. And there were days where I would just say to myself, okay, it wasn't even day by day. It was literally hour by hour. I'd be like, okay, Trey, just try and get from 2 p.m. to 3 and you'll be okay. And then I was like, okay, we got to 3. Let's get to 3 p.m. to 4. Because it was some dark times. And I'm not going to lie, this relationship broke me. It broke me in half. It broke me wide open. Motherhood broke me. It broke me in half. It broke me wide open. This pandemic broke me, right? And I don't feel no shame in that anymore. The tour is called the Shameless Tour because I want people to know you can get up, and you can get up healed if you're willing to dig deep and say, how did I get here? Because it was easy enough for me to be like, oh, I'm going to blame my ex. Oh, that person was horrible, blah, 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 blah. But I also had to look at, how did I participate in this? And what did I also do that wasn't pretty? What did I also choose? Why did I also choose to stay in something that I knew wasn't pretty on the inside, right? And I knew this. And I didn't know, it wasn't something that surprised me in year 3 or year 4. I pretty much knew this 6 weeks in, but I still continue. So I had to look at what was broken in me that decided that I still was going to invest in that. Right. So I'm no longer about placing blame. I'm more about and I say that to every woman, every person who's gone through something, the biggest question you can ask yourself is, why did I allow this? Why did I choose this? And be willing to dig deep and do the work because if not, you're going to keep attracting the same thing, the same person over and over with a different name. That's all about it, right? So that's what it was for me.
Man, accountability is a mug, isn't it? I tell you. And honestly, I'm really glad that you've been able to rise up above it and also recognize where you feel like you fell short and then trying to figure out a way to make it better. But also even talk about it and share it with other people, because you are right. You know, maybe someone like myself, you know, who's probably been through some tough things and thinking that it's just me. And, you know, there's actually someone else out there that I could be able to relate to and understand. And their words were really encouraging for me to just say, hey, you're not alone in this. And you can have, honestly, a second chance at life and rebuild yourself from the ground up, which is awesome.
Exactly.
So, but I'm not going to keep you. I know we've been talking for such a long time. And you know what? And I just want to just let people know, if you are in the Atlanta area, this is a show you don't want to miss. Black girl in love with herself. Trey is amazing when she gets on that stage. I mean, she brings the comedy, she brings the drama, she brings the humor. And on top of that, I mean, she really just finds a way to help you connect with what she's talking about. And it's just such a beautiful thing to see. So, Trey, I'm just so grateful that you've been a person in my life that's been an inspiration to me. And I just love seeing how you do your thing and how you work and how you impact other people and how you're doing your work to move the generation forward in a great way, in a positive way with your stuff. So I'm going to go to the show. I can't wait. I'm excited. And it's on August 25th. August 25th in a few days. So let's go. Get your tickets. Get online. Buy a ticket. I promise you will not be disappointed. You're going to love this show. Trey, thank you so much for having a simple conversation with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. I truly enjoyed it. It was really good seeing you again and being around you. So thank you so much.
Yes, I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you again for taking your time and spending time with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace. Fist bump. There you go. There, right there. All right.
Do it in person when I see you.
Yes.